Hello, and welcome to the second lecture in Race and Racism. Today, I wanted to first jump into give you some preliminary thoughts I've had about how to engage critically with text, and then I'll jump into summaries of the literature that we read. So, I want to say first, there are many ways to critically engage with a text, and I'm just going to illustrate a couple. They're not exhaustive. You can think of them as tools you can use in your critical thinking toolkit. I'm not going to require you to write any papers, but you could use these to write papers. I typically will use these various strategies to just uncover new information about the texts that I'm reading, or just understand them better. You don't have to write a paper to really want to understand the text, right? And so frequently I will use these outside of paper writing. So, and hopefully you will learn to as well. So here's one way. So external objections. This is when you engage with the text by raising a worry or for claims made in the text. And these worries might be anachronistic, right? They might be issues the authors didn't consider worrisome. You might raise an issue about gender or something to and a view that some say, conservative had in the 1800s, but it's more it would be more prescient or something. It would be more pressing in our contemporary era than it would have been to them. Now, this is sort of an external objection in the sense that we're looking back and objecting them from standards that we have today. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. I know some people will suggest that we can't, criticize people in the past for, by our standards today. I think that's nonsense. Of course we can. We praise them by our standards today. Otherwise we wouldn't be debating whether we could criticize them, right? So it cuts both ways. So I think these sorts of objections are fine. And you can really sort of understand where you and your contemporary zeitgeist differ from text from history based on this sort of external objection hunting. Stewart, for instance, is an example of this, Stewart, if you recall, suggested that educating free black people in the North would eliminate racial socioeconomic disparities, and we objected in class and in the summary that this, there are good reasons to suspect that this is not really a satisfying answer. In particular, the sort of white education that Stewart is suggesting free black people be given that might raise them, in the esteem of their white other white citizens. It's not clear that this would be achieve the outcome that Stewart suggested would be or is desired, but also you might worry that this would just engender sort of false beliefs that free black people hold. This might not be something that Stewart was keen on observing at the time, or even observed at the time, or even thought would be relevant. We kind of get this from looking back. Explication is a different way to approach texts or critically engaging with them. This is where you add well-defined conceptual resources to understanding the text. For instance, Stewart didn't explicitly distinguish between implicit and explicit beliefs, but we did in class and in the summary. And by doing so, we were able to interpret Stewart's speech with these conceptual resources in a way that illuminated pretty important aspects of the speech. And it did seem to align with what Stewart was getting at. It's just Stewart herself wasn't using these sorts of concepts to make her point. Now, much like external objections, you can engage with texts raising worries internal to the text. So this, instead of being sort of anachronistic or outside the scope of what the authors were considering, you could raise worries internal to what the authors are considering, like contradictions or bullets that they have to bite. For instance, Walker seemed to blame enslaved individuals who helped plantation owners, despite them being indoctrinated by the plantation owners. We typically don't think of blame that way. I don't even think people at the time thought of blame that way. I don't think Walker's contemporaries thought it was usually okay to go around blaming people who are indoctrinated and have beliefs that were false, that through no fault of their own. Nevertheless, Walker is taking a strong stand here, and that may be. I'm not here at this point saying he's wrong, but I am saying this is something Walker needs to explain. And I suspect that if we could travel back in time and raise this to Walker, this is a sort of concern that he would feel obliged to respond to, and that's sort of like, excuse me, that's sort of like a feature of internal objections. Can compare and contrast is another way to critically engage with text. This involves like drawing parallels to other literature or events, maybe contemporary stuff, but also defending or supporting a claim about comparison. For example, the term lynching has been used to describe police tactics in the U.S. in the past decade, but this has like a loaded history. This term is like means something specific and has for a while. And so one might compare the use of the term today, by various groups and the use in the past and what that means. Like you might, for instance, argue that it's unacceptable or acceptable to use the term now to describe policing tactics. And alternatively, you may just think that a different term is warranted because it's not really what's going on now is not the same as it's not like in the same ballpark even. Now again, I'm not taking a stand on that, but this would be this would be a good illustration of sort of compare and contrast approach to critically engaging with text. My favorite of all of these is resonance. This is critically engaging with the text in a way that's personal. So this involves you trying to take lessons or make lessons from the text relevant in surprising ways to your life. And it is, befitting that hard to provide an example for, right? But it's actually not too hard to implement for you. It won't be hard to implement for me either. Like it's easy for me to make the text relevant to me because I know me better than I know other people, right? So my favorite, my go-to example for this sort of thing is, it's not in this class, but it's not related to the content of this class, but it is related to the content of like, class divisions, and it's effectively working in academia, especially as a philosopher. You might think that I have like all sorts of freedom to say truths and stuff like that, but I then like go read Marx and I think, oh wait, I'm working in a capitalist framework that sort of like incentivizes me to produce papers for peers because in like peer-reviewed journals, so that I can demonstrate my worth to administrators who might hire me. And so like I like have to publish a lot, whether it's right or wrong. I just have to publish a lot. Like that's the currency of the realm. And you could probably imagine how this might stifle creativity, which is one of the things that Marx thought was just real problematic about the way we approach labor under capitalist frameworks. So again, this is resonant. Like this hits me personally. Like this is like something I deal with every day, and it's a way that Marx's material really speaks to me. Okay, so now I'm going to hop over to outline these three texts. First, we'll start with Sojourner Truth's "Ain't I a Woman?" Here's Truth. Like powerful image, right? Like very, very strong. Now, Truth in this speech is observing with very powerful rhetoric and performative contradiction, namely overlooking of black women as human beings. There had been progress on race issues at the time, but Truth is observing, like through various compare and contrast strategies, that all that race progress or racial progress is excluding black women, and this has gone on forever, right? Like this is sort of like a continued or perpetual issue in race relations. Black women are usually overlooked. We're actually going to talk quite a bit about that later, but like this is prescient in the sense that we can see it as having happened in the past, but like this has gone on forever, right? Like I wanted to point out this. Without going into like a real deep summary of this speech, because it's very short and the message is super clear, but I just wanted to note that Truth's use of the repeated interrogative, which is the title of the question, or the title of the article, "Ain't I a Woman?" It's powerful rhetoric. And powerful rhetoric is something we're going to learn to use as we go forward, especially in the last 2/3 of the class. So it's great to point this out here. Repetition is powerful. We're pattern-seeking things. When we see stuff repeated in our environment, we tend to think it's truer somehow. We're just wired this way, right? Repetition suggests truth. We And the answer to this question, too, on the other hand, is obvious, right? Of course, truth is a woman. So this is a rhetorical question. It presupposes the answer, right? This combination is again just powerful rhetoric, and if you can think about it this way: if I come to you and I say I am human, there's this sort of like presumes just as an interrogative that this is something that's in question, right? Like why else would I say it? But look, know how the meaning shifts. If I were to ask instead, aren't I human? Now it's on you, right? Like now the presumption is like you don't think I am. It's obvious that I am. It probably would sound weird if I said I am human to you, right? Like because I'm obviously human. But like me posing that rhetorical question to you, like what did you do wrong, right? Like now the burden is shifted, and this is what's going on. Like one of the really wonderful aspects of this article is this like burden shifting. It's not really engaging with the question. It's not really asking a question. It's shifting a burden. This, I think, is this sort of like performative aspect of the text is, and the rhetorical power is also on display in Frederick Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Here's Mr. Douglass. Now, this is a rich and sophisticated essay, and I'm not going to be able to do justice here. But again, following in suit with truth, I want to point out this sort of performative aspect, the irony, as a means of conveyance. I'm going to add something new here because I'm going to say something you probably, even if you're familiar with the text or even if you've read the scholarly literature on it, I suspect you're not going to see what I'm about to say come up anywhere. But I think it's true all the same. So I want to point out first that Douglass starts the essay essentially claiming he's not going to engage in disputes over whether he's human or whether slaves are human or whether they have dignity. And that makes sense, right? This is important. Engaging in such disputes lends credibility to them, right? Like if people are telling you you're not human and you argue with them, in a sense you're like giving them some power. And he thinks it's obvious, just like truth did. He thinks it's just obvious that like truth is a woman and he's a human being that deserves respect. Those who disagree don't share as common, I think, decent ground with Douglass, and they're not worth disputing. Now this is I think the right way to approach this question. But here's where the irony enters, because Douglass then proceeds to dismantle several disputes about the question. Like he says he's not going to engage in it, like this dispute, and yet he does anyway. I don't think this was a mistake. Douglass was a genius. I read this as like pointed irony, given all the irony he saw around him at the time. He's like both pointing out irony and engaging in it, and it is powerful. Look, he observes, for instance, that there's been progress on outlawing the slave trade externally, but there's an internal slave trade. This is like raising children to be slaves. Like that wasn't outlawed, right? And that perpetuates subjugation. And Americans, he points out, defeated the English to form a new nation, and yet turned around and built that nation using an enslaved population, right? And here on the 4th of July, Americans are expected to celebrate the victory over the tyrannical English, which just suggests like either an ignorance of the past or false beliefs or straight up deception on the part of the celebrating Americans. The irony here, I'm saying, comes in 3 levels. The first level, there's just various examples of white Americans acting irrationally when it comes to race, yet claiming to be superior. Like this is a theme throughout Douglass's text. Second level of irony, enslaved people expected to celebrate the liberation of their oppressors. This is in the title, right? Like, I mean, it comes through in the title. And irony at level 3, and this is the one you probably wouldn't see. This is my addition. Douglass's intentional performative contradiction in rejecting the question of his dignity while engaging it. I think he is illustrating irony. I think he is engaging in irony, and I think he is saying, look, I can do it too. Like if it is at the as he points out in the first level, if it is the height of being superior to act irrationally, then by the time he gets to irony level 3, he's saying, I can do that just as well as you can, right? Again, this is one of the cleverest essays ever written. It's genius. Okay, so let me jump over to Wells' Lynch Laws in America, or Lynch Law in America. This is going to be like more or less some historical summary. Mostly because we're going to talk a lot about all of or this one in class when we meet. Here's Wells. Now, also here is a sign, or a street that was named after Wells in Chicago, which I came across on a long, unfortunate trip through downtown when we were allowed to go outside. This was actually, I think this was only done in like 2014, but still, yeah, pretty cool. It was a nice surprise. Okay, so Wells is pointing out or at least the historical background here is that we've made a leap in our reading there from Douglass through the Civil War to the Reconstruction era. This is Reconstruction in the sense that the North is imposing martial law on Southern states to ensure that Southerners follow federal policies. Wells was writing after President Grant, for instance, passed laws enforcing voting rights for black individuals in the South. Progress was, in retrospect, actually pretty impressive. There was black representation in Congress. Like there was social mobility, like people were making money, economic prosperity. I mean, it wasn't like on par with white Southerners, but surprising. It was surprising progress under the North's martial law or the Reconstruction. Now, eventually, because of the progress, the federal government stepped out of the Southerners' affairs. And almost as soon as they did, this really kind of makes you want to take back what I just said, or makes me want to take back what I said about progress, or at least put it in scare quotes. But almost as soon as they did, extra-legal organizations emerged from hiding to undermine voting rights and suppress people based on race. The KKK, for instance, is a repeated, heinous offender involving brutal treatment of black individuals. They used violence to signal like some sort of natural law. Wells talks about this, by the way, some sort of natural law outside of federal law to exert white supremacy. Politically, this emerged with the Southern Democrats, who turned a blind eye to tactics like lynching. Wells discusses lynching and lynch laws and the justification for it and its prevalence at length in this paper, or this article. It's an important, just again for the historical context to really. I think Wells does a great job painting the picture, but just so you know, to understand the role lynching played in all of this sort of like political and like Southern emergence and deconstruction, you might say, it was like a family affair. Like, children were let out of schools to go watch lynches. A lynching, postcards were made and collected. White people put on their best clothes to go enjoy a spectacle of a black person being lynched in the street. Crowds would come from miles around to watch this sort of thing, congregate. All this was, and this is one of Wells' points, this is inculcating in witnesses. People were watching this. This is what good white people do, and this is what bad people deserve. And of course, fill in the blank, right, for bad people. You know who I'm talking about, the people who were being lynched. And this is just like dressing up, just like you would go to church, or do to go to church, going to see this event that is supposed to happen as part of the natural law, right? And the consequences and culpability extended beyond the lynching. People were subsidizing this by buying postcards. People were keeping them as memorabilia. Wells is concerned with all of this. And one of the major points of this paper is the creation and sustaining of social norms. Wells is very aware of this. Popularizing lynching, it desensitizes one to humanity and creates expectations of violence against a population that are presumed true. That's what happens. You raise people thinking that this is what good white people do to bad people, and all of the bad people look the same. And you're surrounded and raised in this environment where people from other races are treated differently and treated poorly and treated as if they're inferior. And this sustains the social norms, right? Like this is expected, presumed true. Just like when Douglass is saying, I'm not going to dispute with you over whether I have dignity because that's common ground. That's an assumption that is presumed true. Here we see after Reconstruction, children raised, and populations sustaining social norm that's not true, right? Like that, nope, you're inferior. The norm isn't that you have dignity, it's that you don't. And this is powerful, and this is destructive. Let me show you how destructive. It should be no surprise. Michael Donald, he was 19 and tracked by 3 KKK members in Alabama who were looking for a black person to kill. He was beaten, killed, and hanged from a tree. This was in 1981. And local police investigated as possibly related to drugs, and they nearly dropped the case. This is in Alabama. Jesse Jackson organized a march to raise awareness, was in contact with a lot of local leaders. FBI, the Department of Justice, and several other federal government officials forced a continuation of the investigation. Ultimately, 4 KKK members were identified as involved, but this is 2 years after the death. Now, 1981. Just note, this is, by the way, just want to note the hot spots. Lynchings. These dots represent lynchings. Again, 1981. This was a lot. You'd take it in. Okay, we'll pick up from there. I want to see you next.